Everyone thought I married the ruthless CEO because I wanted his money, but they never knew the truth he was hiding behind those cold eyes. The first time I walked into the Whitmore estate as Adrian Whitmore's husband, I could feel the judgment before anyone even spoke. The marble floors shined beneath my shoes. The crystal lights above me reflected every expensive detail of the room, and yet I felt like the smallest person there. My name was Ethan Parker. I was 27 years old, a freelance graphic designer with a modest apartment, a secondhand laptop, and a life that had always been ordinary. Adrian Whitmore was the opposite of ordinary. He was the CEO of Whitmore Holdings, a man whose name appeared on magazine covers, business reports, and conversations whispered by people who feared his decisions. The world called him ruthless. They said he never smiled, never trusted anyone, and never made a move without a reason. So when the news broke that Adrian Whitmore had married someone like me, everyone had the same reaction: confusion, shock, and then pity. Poor guy. Someone whispered at the wedding reception. He probably thinks he won the lottery. Another person laughed quietly. Give it 6 months. The CEO will get bored. I heard every word. I pretended I didn't. That was something I had become good at. Smiling when people underestimated me. Staying quiet when people decided they already knew my story. But what nobody knew was that I never married Adrian for his fortune. In fact, before the wedding day, I had barely owned anything that could compare to his world. I knew the rumors. I knew the headlines. I knew people thought I was just a temporary solution to a powerful man's problem. And maybe that was exactly what Adrian wanted everyone to believe. During the ceremony, he stood beside me in a perfectly tailored black suit, his expression calm and unreadable. His gray eyes gave nothing away. When the cameras flashed, he looked like the same untouchable CEO everyone feared. But then his hand gently reached for mine. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to notice. Are you okay? He quietly asked. It was such a simple question, but it surprised me more than any grand gesture could have. Because Adrian Whitmore, the man everyone described as emotionless, was the first person that day to ask how I felt. I looked at him, trying to understand the person behind the reputation. I'm fine, I whispered. He studied my face for a second before answering. You don't have to pretend with me. Those words stayed in my mind long after the ceremony ended. Because everyone believed I was the person being saved by this marriage. Everyone thought I was the lucky one. They saw a powerful CEO and an ordinary man standing together and assumed they understood the entire story. But they didn't know about the promise Adrian had made years ago. They didn't know why he chose me when he could have chosen anyone. And they definitely didn't know that the man they called Ruthless was the only person who remembered the one moment in my life when I needed someone to believe in me. That was the secret hidden behind our marriage. And when the truth finally came out, the world would realize they had been wrong about both of us. The first night I moved into Adrian Whitmore's mansion, I learned something that nobody in the world knew. The man everyone feared was not cold because he had no feelings. He was cold because he had spent years hiding them. The Whitmore estate was quiet in a way my old apartment never was. There were no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no traffic sounds outside my window, no familiar little reminders of my simple life. Instead, there were tall ceilings, endless hallways, and rooms so large that my footsteps felt like they belonged to someone else. I stood in front of the guest room that was supposed to become my new bedroom and stared at the perfectly arranged furniture. Everything was beautiful. Everything was expensive. And somehow, I still felt like a stranger. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. You do not have to stay in this room, he said from behind me. I turned around and found him standing near the doorway, still wearing the serious expression that made business partners nervous. This room is fine, I replied. He looked at me for a moment. You are my husband, Ethan, not a guest. Those words caught me off guard. Because everyone else treated this marriage like a transaction, a contract, a business decision. Even some of Adrian's closest employees avoided looking at me for too long, as if they were trying to figure out what kind of person could possibly end up beside the most powerful CEO in the city. The next morning, I discovered exactly how much attention our marriage had attracted. My phone was filled with messages from old acquaintances, online articles, and comments from strangers who knew nothing about me. Some said I was lucky. Others said I was using Adrian. Some people even wondered how long I would last in his world. I closed my phone and placed it on the kitchen counter, pretending the words did not bother me. But Adrian saw my expression. "What did they say?" he asked. "Nothing important." He leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. "You are a terrible liar." I almost smiled. Almost. It was strange. Adrian Whitmore was supposed to be intimidating, but around me, he seemed different. He was still quiet, still serious, but there was something else beneath that image. Something softer. Later that day, I attended my first company event as Adrian's husband. The moment we entered the building, conversations stopped. People looked at me like I was a mystery they wanted to solve. I expected Adrian to walk ahead and leave me behind. Instead, he slowed his pace so we could walk together. When someone approached and made a polite but clearly dismissive comment about my background, Adrian's expression changed. Not with anger, not with cruelty, just disappointment. "Ethan's value has nothing to do with his position, his wealth, or his name," Adrian said calmly. "Anyone who believes otherwise does not understand what matters." For a second, the entire room went silent. I looked at him, surprised. The man everyone called Ruthless had just defended me without hesitation. That night, when we returned home, I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my mind since the wedding. "Why me?" Adrian stopped walking. The city lights reflected through the windows behind him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Something honest. Something almost vulnerable. "Because you were the only person who saw me before everyone else decided who I was." And for the first time, I wondered if this marriage was not about what the world thought it was. Maybe there was a story Adrian had been carrying alone. A story that started long before our wedding day. For the first time since becoming Adrian Whitmore's husband, I started wondering if I was the only person who did not know the truth about him. Everyone else had already decided who Adrian was. A ruthless CEO. A man without emotions. Someone who treated every relationship like a business agreement. But every day I spent with him revealed small details that did not match the rumors. He remembered that I preferred tea over coffee. He noticed when I skipped meals while working. He quietly replaced the uncomfortable chair in my home office with one that actually supported my back. They were small things. Things most people would never notice. But I noticed. And that made it harder to believe that Adrian Whitmore was the heartless person everyone described. A week after moving into the estate, I found myself standing outside Adrian's private office. I had been looking for a file I needed for a design project, and his assistant told me it might be there. The door was slightly open. I was about to knock when I heard my name. "Ethan Parker is not part of your plan," a woman's voice said. I stopped. I recognized her immediately. Victoria Whitmore, Adrian's cousin and one of the people who had openly questioned our marriage. "You are risking everything for someone who has no place in this family," she continued. I should have walked away. I knew that. But then I heard Adrian answer. "Do not talk about him like that." His voice was calm, but there was something different underneath it. A quiet certainty. "You are making a mistake," Victoria replied. "Everyone knows this marriage is only temporary." There was a pause. Then Adrian said something that made me forget how to breathe for a moment. "You are wrong. Ethan is the only person in this room who has never treated me like a title." I stepped back before they could notice me. My heart felt strangely heavy, because those words were not what I expected. Later that evening, I found Adrian sitting alone in the library. The room was filled with shelves of old books, warm lighting, and the kind of silence that made you think about things you usually avoided. "You seem tired," he said without looking up from his laptop. I sat across from him. "Can I ask you something?" He closed the laptop. "Of course." I hesitated. "Why do you let people think the worst about you?" For a moment, Adrian looked surprised. Not angry, just surprised. "Because it is easier." "Easier?" I asked. He looked toward the window. "People respect a person they fear. They question a person they care about." That answer stayed with me. Adrian Whitmore had built an entire image around himself. A wall so strong that nobody could get close enough to see what was behind it. But somehow, I was starting to see pieces of the person underneath. Was our marriage always supposed to be this complicated? I asked softly. Adrian looked back at me. No, his answer came immediately. "It was supposed to protect you." I froze. Protect me from what? He did not answer. Not because he did not know. Because he was choosing not to tell me yet. And that was when I realized there was a secret hidden inside our marriage. Something bigger than rumors. Bigger than the contract everyone believed connected us. Adrian had not chosen me because I was convenient. He had chosen me because of something that happened years ago, something I had completely forgotten. And somehow, I had a feeling Adrian remembered every single detail. For the first time in years, Adrian Whitmore looked like someone who did not have all the answers. The world saw him as a man who controlled every situation, every meeting, and every decision. But that night in the library, when I asked about the reason behind our marriage, I saw something different. I saw hesitation. I saw a man carrying a secret that was heavier than any business problem he had ever faced. The next morning, Adrian acted as if nothing had happened. He walked into breakfast wearing the same calm expression, reading reports on his tablet while drinking his coffee. If I had not seen that moment in the library, I might have believed he was still the untouchable CEO everyone talked about. But now I knew there was another side of him, a side he only showed when nobody else was watching. "You have a meeting today," Adrian said, "with the design team." I looked up from my plate. "You remember my schedule?" He glanced at me. "Of course." I smiled slightly. "You know, most CEOs have assistants for that." For a second, something almost like a smile appeared on his face. Almost. "Most CEOs are not married to you." It was such a simple sentence, but it stayed with me all day. Because Adrian said things like that without realizing how much they affected me. He never made dramatic promises. He never tried to impress me. Instead, he showed care in quiet ways. When my car was delayed, he arranged transportation. When I mentioned that the office lights bothered my eyes, he had someone check the lighting in my workspace. When I forgot my jacket during a cold evening, he was already waiting outside with it. I started noticing the details everyone else missed. The way he always checked if I had eaten. The way he listened even when he looked busy. The way his expression softened whenever he thought I was not paying attention. But there was still a distance between us. A line neither of us crossed. Our marriage had started as an agreement, and sometimes I wondered if Adrian was afraid to let it become something real. A few days later, I attended a charity event with him. It was the first time we appeared together in public since the wedding. The moment we entered the room, I felt the familiar attention. People looked at me. They whispered. They judged. But this time, something was different. Adrian did not walk ahead of me. He stayed beside me. When reporters asked about our relationship, he simply placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Ethan is the most important person in my life." The room became quiet. Even I was surprised. Because Adrian was not someone who spoke carelessly. Every word from him carried meaning. On the way home, I looked out the window and tried to understand what was happening between us. "You did not have to say that," I told him. Adrian looked at me. "Yes, I did." "Why?" I asked. He was silent for a moment before answering. "Because people keep trying to decide your value based on what they see." His voice became softer. "And I am tired of watching them be wrong." My heart moved in a way I did not expect. The man everyone called Ruthless was the only person who seemed to notice when I felt invisible. But I still did not know the full truth. I did not know that Adrian had kept something from me for years. A memory. A promise. A moment from the past that connected our lives long before we ever stood together at the altar. And soon, that hidden chapter would finally begin to open. The morning everything changed started with a single photograph. I woke up expecting another quiet day in the Whitmore estate. Another day of pretending that the world did not have opinions about my marriage. But when I reached for my phone, I saw dozens of messages waiting for me. News articles, social media posts, comments from strangers. Everyone was talking about Adrian and me again. At first, I thought it was another round of rumors. I was used to those by now, but this time was different. The headline was everywhere. Whitmore marriage exposed. Was the CEO's husband just a strategic choice? My stomach tightened as I opened the article. There was a picture of Adrian and me from the charity event. The moment when he placed his hand on my shoulder. The moment when he told everyone I was important to him. But the article twisted everything. It claimed Adrian was using our marriage to improve his public image. It suggested I was only part of a carefully planned arrangement. And the worst part was not the article itself. It was the comments underneath. Everyone knew this was not real. He married him because it was convenient. The CEO always has a reason. I stared at the screen until the words started to blur. I knew strangers did not know me. I knew their opinions should not matter. But somehow it still hurt. Because a small part of me wondered if they were right. Maybe I had been too hopeful. Maybe I had mistaken kindness for something deeper. When Adrian came home that evening, he immediately noticed something was wrong. He always did. "Ethan." His voice was quiet. I looked away. I am fine. He gave me the same look he always gave me when he knew I was pretending. You are not. I handed him my phone. He read the article silently. His expression did not change, but I saw something shift in his eyes. Disappointment. Not at me. At the situation. I will handle this, he said. I shook my head. That is the problem, Adrian. He looked at me. What is? I took a breath. You always handle things. You solve problems. You control everything. But sometimes I do not know if you are protecting me or protecting the image of this marriage. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Adrian did not immediately answer. And for the first time, I saw uncertainty on his face. Do you really think that? He asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him I trusted him. But I was scared. I do not know what to think anymore. Those words seemed to hurt him more than I expected. Adrian looked down for a moment before speaking. Ethan, there is something you need to understand. He walked closer, but stopped a few feet away, like he was giving me space. Everything I have done since the day we got married was never about my reputation. I looked at him. Then what was it about? His eyes met mine. You. The answer was simple. Almost too simple. But before I could ask more, his assistant called. There was a problem at the company. Another rumor had appeared. Another person was trying to challenge Adrian's decisions. And this time, the attack was not only against him. It was against me too. The next day, Adrian asked me to attend a private meeting at Whitmore Holdings. I expected another explanation about business. I expected another carefully planned solution. Instead, he placed an old envelope on the table. The paper looked worn, like it had been kept for many years. I should have shown you this before, he said. My hands moved toward the envelope slowly. What is it? Adrian looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Regret. The reason I found you again. My heart stopped for a moment. Because suddenly, I understood. Our story had not started at the wedding. It had started years before. And Adrian had been carrying the truth alone all this time. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. It was only a few pieces of paper, old and slightly worn around the edges. But the moment I held it in my hands, I felt like I was holding a piece of a story I was never supposed to forget. Adrian sat across from me in his office at Whitmore Holdings, watching quietly as I opened it. For the first time since I met him, he did not look like the confident CEO who had answers for everything. He looked nervous, and that alone told me this was something important. Inside the envelope was a photograph. I stared at it for several seconds before I understood what I was seeing. It was me, younger, standing outside a small coffee shop I used to visit during college. I looked completely different back then, less confident, less certain, but there was no mistake. It was me. Why do you have this? I asked. Adrian looked down at the photograph. Because I have never forgotten that day. My mind went back through years of memories. There were so many ordinary moments that I had never considered important. Random conversations, small acts of kindness, people I had met and never expected to see again. Adrian, I do not understand. He took a slow breath. Before I became the CEO of Whitmore Holdings, I was just someone trying to prove myself. His voice was quieter than usual. My family expected perfection. They expected me to succeed without mistakes. I spent years trying to become the person everyone wanted me to be. I listened without interrupting. This was the first time Adrian had ever spoken about himself. Not the CEO, not the public figure, just Adrian. 10 years ago, I was having one of the worst days of my life, he continued. I had lost confidence in myself. I thought everyone around me only cared about what I could achieve. He looked at the photograph again. Then I met you. I felt my heart skip slightly. Me? He nodded. You did not know who I was. You did not know my family name. You did not know anything about my future. You just saw someone who needed a little kindness. Slowly, the memory returned. A rainy afternoon. A stranger sitting alone outside a coffee shop. A quiet conversation between two people who had no reason to remember each other. I had offered him encouragement. I had told him that his value was not measured by what other people expected from him. At the time, I thought it was just a simple conversation. I never imagined it would stay with someone for years. You remembered that? I asked. Adrian smiled faintly. I remembered everything. The room became quiet. Suddenly, every confusing moment started making sense. The way he protected me. The way he looked at me when he thought I was not paying attention. The reason he chose me. It was not because I was convenient. It was not because I fit into some business strategy. It was because, long before I knew his name, I had already given him something he thought he had lost. Hope. Why did you never tell me? I asked. Adrian looked away for a moment. Because I was afraid. That answer surprised me more than anything else. You were afraid? He nodded. I was afraid that if you knew who I was now, you would think my kindness was an obligation. I wanted you to choose me because of who I am, not because of my position. For the first time, I saw the truth behind Adrian Whitmore. The Ruthless CEO was never someone without feelings. He was someone who had spent years protecting the one feeling he cared about most. And as I looked at the photograph between us, I realized something that changed everything. Our marriage was not the beginning of our story. It was the moment when a story that started 10 years ago finally found its way back to us. For the first time since I entered Adrian Whitmore's world, I stopped seeing him as the man everyone feared. I stopped seeing the headlines, the business reports, and the carefully created image of the ruthless CEO. Instead, I saw the person who had been sitting alone 10 years ago, carrying a weight nobody else noticed. And somehow, I had been the person who reminded him that he was still human. The truth changed everything. But it also created a new question. If Adrian had remembered me for all these years, why did he hide it until now? The answer came slowly over the next few days. Adrian did not suddenly become more open. He was still Adrian. He still arrived at the office before everyone else. He still reviewed every detail of every project. He still carried himself like someone who had trained himself never to show uncertainty. But now I understood him differently. I noticed the moments when the mask slipped, the quiet pauses when he thought nobody was watching, the way he looked at the old photograph before placing it carefully back inside his desk, the way he seemed relieved whenever I smiled. It was strange realizing that the person everyone considered impossible to understand had actually been waiting for someone to try. However, the world outside our home had not changed. The rumors continued. Some people still believed our marriage was nothing more than a business arrangement. Some investors questioned Adrian's decisions because they believed I had influenced him. They did not see the truth. They only saw what they wanted to believe. One afternoon, I visited Whitmore Holdings to bring Adrian lunch. It was something simple. A meal from a small restaurant near my old apartment. Something I used to eat before my life changed completely. When I entered the building, I noticed the atmosphere was different. People were watching the news on their phones. Adrian's assistant approached me with a concerned expression. There is a board meeting today, she explained. Some members are questioning Adrian's choices. My heart tightened. Because of me? She hesitated. That hesitation answered my question. When I entered Adrian's office, he immediately noticed my expression. You heard, he said. I nodded. They think I am a problem. Adrian looked at me calmly. They are wrong. But what if they are not? I asked quietly. What if staying with me creates more problems for you? For a moment, Adrian said nothing. Then he walked toward the window overlooking the city. Ethan, do you know what the biggest mistake people make when they look at me? I shook my head. They think I care about winning every battle. He turned around. I do not. I listened. Carefully. I spent years building this company because I thought success would make me feel complete. I was wrong. His eyes softened. The moment I found you again was the first time I realized there were things more important than being powerful. I did not know what to say. Adrian Whitmore, the man who had everything, was telling me that I was the one thing he never wanted to lose. That evening, Adrian made a decision that surprised everyone. He called a public press conference, not to defend his company, not to protect his reputation, but to tell the truth. As cameras filled the room and reporters waited for answers, Adrian stepped forward. I watched from the side as he looked directly into the crowd. For years, people have created a story about my marriage without knowing the truth, he said. Today, I want to correct that. The room became silent. And then Adrian said the words that changed everything. Ethan Parker is not someone who entered my life because of my success. He is the person who believed in me before I had any success at all. At that moment, I realized Adrian was not protecting an image anymore. He was choosing me, in front of the entire world. After Adrian told the world the truth, I expected everything to become easier. I thought that once people understood our story, the whispers would disappear and the questions would finally stop. But I quickly learned that the truth does not erase the past overnight. It only gives people a new reason to look closer. The days after the press conference were filled with messages, interviews, and endless discussions about Adrian Whitmore. But this time, the conversation was different. People were not asking why a ruthless CEO married someone like me. They were asking how they had misunderstood him for so long. For the first time, I saw Adrian without the weight of everyone's expectations on his shoulders. He still had meetings. He still had responsibilities. He was still the CEO of one of the largest companies in the country. But something had changed. He no longer acted like he had to carry everything alone. One evening, I found him sitting in the living room after a long day. The city lights reflected through the windows, creating soft patterns across the room. He looked exhausted, but peaceful. "You are quiet today," I said. Adrian looked up from the book in his hands. "I was thinking." I smiled slightly. "That sounds dangerous." For a moment, he looked surprised. Then, a small smile appeared on his face. It was rare. So rare that I almost forgot what it looked like. "You make jokes now," I said. "Only around you," he replied. That simple answer stayed with me. Because Adrian had spent years showing the world only one version of himself. But with me, he was different. He was someone who laughed quietly at small things. Someone who remembered stories I had forgotten. Someone who cared more than he admitted. A few days later, we returned to the coffee shop where we first met 10 years ago. It was not a famous place. It was not luxurious. It was just a small neighborhood cafe with warm lights and familiar smells. Adrian stood near the entrance, looking around like he was remembering every detail. "This place changed," he said. I looked around. "Not much." He smiled. "Maybe I changed." I knew what he meant. The person standing beside me was not the same person I had met years ago. He had become stronger, more successful, and more powerful. But the kindness I remembered was still there. "I always wondered if you remembered me," I admitted. Adrian looked at me. "I never forgot you." The honesty in his voice made me look away for a moment. Not because I was uncomfortable, because I was trying to understand how someone could hold on to a single memory for so many years. On the way home, I finally asked the question I had been afraid to ask. "Adrian, when did this stop being just a marriage agreement for you?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for my hand. A simple gesture. A quiet one. I think it happened the moment I realized I was no longer pretending. My heart felt strangely calm. Because somewhere between the rumors, the misunderstandings, and the secrets, something real had grown. We were no longer two people connected by a contract. We were two people who had found each other twice. Once in the past, and once again when we were finally ready to understand what we meant to each other. But even as we began a new chapter, I knew there was still one final truth waiting to be revealed. The world knew why Adrian chose me, but they still did not know what I had given him in return. For a long time, I believed Adrian Whitmore was the person who needed saving. I thought I was the one who gave him hope when the world only saw his success. I thought my small act of kindness years ago was the reason he found his way back to me. But I was wrong, because the truth was, Adrian had given me something just as important. He had reminded me that I was worth choosing. Before I met Adrian again, I had spent years believing I was ordinary. I was the person people overlooked. The person who stood quietly in the background while others took the spotlight. Even after becoming Adrian's husband, a small part of me still wondered if I truly belonged in his world. But Adrian never made me feel like I was beneath him. He never treated me like someone lucky to be there. He treated me like an equal. And slowly, without realizing it, I started seeing myself differently. Months passed after the truth about our marriage became public. The rumors faded. The headlines changed. People who once questioned me began telling a completely different story. They no longer saw me as the person who married a powerful CEO. They saw me as the person who knew the man behind the title. But the most important change was not how the world saw us. It was how we saw each other. One evening, Adrian and I returned to the small coffee shop where our story first began. We sat by the same window where he had once been a stranger carrying the weight of impossible expectations. The place had changed slightly over the years, but the feeling remained the same. Warm, quiet, familiar. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we never met that day?" I asked. Adrian looked outside at the street lights glowing through the window. "Sometimes." "And what do you think?" He smiled softly. "I think I would have become exactly who everyone expected me to be." I looked at him. "And is that a bad thing?" Adrian shook his head. "It would have been successful, but it would not have been happy." His answer stayed with me, because I finally understood something. Adrian did not need someone to complete him. He was already strong. He was already capable. What he needed was someone who reminded him that being strong did not mean he had to be alone. And he gave me the same gift. He showed me that being ordinary did not mean being invisible. That being kind did not mean being weak. That my value was never decided by the size of my bank account, my job title, or the opinions of people who never knew my story. On the anniversary of our wedding, Adrian surprised me with something simple. Not a luxury gift, not a grand event, just a handwritten letter. Inside were memories. The day we met. The things I had said that he never forgot. The moments when I made him believe life could be different. At the end of the letter, there was one sentence that I read several times. You were the first person who saw me as a person. I hope I spend the rest of my life doing the same for you. I looked at Adrian after reading it. The man who once seemed impossible to understand was standing in front of me, completely honest and completely real. And I finally knew the truth. Our marriage was never about a CEO and someone ordinary. It was never about money, status, or reputation. It was about two people who found each other at the exact moment they needed someone to believe in them. The world had created its own version of our story, but the truth was much simpler. Adrian Whitmore was not the ruthless CEO who changed my life. He was the person who helped me realize I was never someone who needed to be saved. We saved each other.